open and wheelchair accessible and well ventilated and available to the public are these bus shelters on the transit infrastructure.
Tonight, a look at homelessness in Winnipeg during the pandemic.
Some of the numbers in northern Manitoba. We're seeing cases in many different communities in the north. Some of those cases are related to holiday gatherings.
And a rise in COVID cases in northern Manitoba. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. An Innu woman from Quebec was just appointed advisor to the United Nations Secretary General. Marjolaine Etienne will represent all First Nations of Canada on the international stage. But back home in Quebec, some leaders say they're not fond of the UN's work for Indigenous rights. Lindsay Richardson has more.
The First Nations of Canada have a new representative at the United Nations.
Oui, je m'appelle Marjolaine Etienne. Je viens de la communauté de Mastoyats. Je suis de la nation Innu.
Marjolaine Etienne hails from Mastoyats, a community of 2,200 in Quebec's Saguenay region. She was handpicked for an advisor position by the UN's Secretary General. The news came at the perfect time.
Je pense venant quelques jours avant les fêtes, donc j'ai vraiment trouvé que c'était vraiment un beau cadeau de Noël.
Etienne has a 15-year background in politics and is the managing director of a local media corporation. She received human rights training at the UN in Geneva in 2018. So this new opportunity is not taken lightly.
Je me suis sentie effectivement comme femme, comme mère de famille, Coco, moi aussi également grand-mère. Tout cet aspect-là venait faire en sorte effectivement que je sentais dans moi que c'était une autre étape de ma carrière professionnelle que je passais.
The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP, is now being debated at the federal level. The proposed Bill C-15 would commit it to law. But not everyone's on board. A survey by the Montreal Economic Institute shows the UN declaration is nowhere close to winning a popular vote in Quebec. Quote, Quebecers oppose the special or additional rights that some politicians seem to want to confer on First Nations. UNDRIP is often rejected because of a belief it would give First Nations the right to veto development projects. More than half those who responded to the Economic Institute survey feel provincial and federal governments should have the last say. 65% of Legault government supporters believe First Nations shouldn't have special rights at all. But Quebec's Indigenous Affairs Minister believes parts of the declaration are workable.
Le principe est intéressant, mais c'est dans l'application, on voulait s'assurer que les responsabilités des provinces soient respectées. C'est pour ça que nous sommes 7 provinces à avoir fait la même demande.
That said, Etienne won't have to go to bat for UNDRIP. Instead, she'll be advising officials on use of a fund allowing Indigenous peoples worldwide to attend UN summits or workshops.
Dès que j'ai reçu la nouvelle, en fait, j'étais fière de moi, j'étais fière de ma famille, j'étais fière de ma communauté. En fait, j'étais fière pour tout le monde. Et puis, je trouvais effectivement que c'était un bel honneur et puis une belle reconnaissance aussi au niveau de cette annonce-là.
Etienne's first virtual meeting is set for this February. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
We want to hear what you think about those studies' findings. Do you feel that it's similar elsewhere in Canada, not just in Quebec? We always love to hear your thoughts. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and now TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see all of our latest stories. While the COVID-19 vaccine is slowly rolling out, many areas across Canada are seeing a spike in cases as this pandemic drags on. In Manitoba, the province has been under code red restrictions since before Christmas, with many businesses closed. But what do those restrictions mean for the people who live on the streets? Daryl Stranger takes a look at the impact that COVID has had on the homelessness in Winnipeg.
Code red restrictions and the subsequent closure of businesses have been in place for months in Manitoba. While COVID-19 cases have decreased as a result, it has impacted Winnipeg's homeless. There may not be more people homeless on the streets, but rather more people moving around with the businesses closed.
A lot of public spaces are closed, including libraries, community centers, coffee shops, fast food restaurants. So all those doors are closed. What is open, always open, and wheelchair accessible and well ventilated and available to the public are these bus shelters on the transit infrastructure.
Mitch Bourbonnier is a community outreach worker in Winnipeg. He walks the streets daily and assists those living unsheltered. He is part of a new program called the Downtown Community Safety Partnership, designed to help those unsheltered in the city of Winnipeg during the pandemic.
We're going to be running 24 hours a day. We have vehicles, we're going to have foot patrols, we have a connect team, and our job is to support vulnerable people in our downtown of Winnipeg to make sure that they can get the safety and that they can start the process of having a safer life. We're trying to take pressure off police, fire, paramedic, first responders. We're going to have some medical people with us 24 hours a day, and we're going to look forward to work with our partners.
Winnipeg Transit has also seen an increase from 2019 to 2020 in the amount of reports of people sleeping in bus shelters, especially during the winter months, with some increases more than double the year prior. Clemens says there are a couple of options that might help bring these numbers down.
We know that based on what happened in the spring, that the solutions to this are either a reopening of the public spaces that people would otherwise access, or on the other hand, some more sustainable housing options for people. Outreach workers, even city councillors interacting with those who are staying in bus shelters are generally hearing that what people are seeking is a safe place to call home.
Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
In Ottawa today, the federal government has hit what they're calling a bump in the road. That's in terms of rolling out the COVID-19 vaccinations. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that vaccination deliveries will be delayed because distribution of the Pfizer vaccine will be temporarily reduced due to manufacturing issues in Europe. Pfizer will upscale deliveries, so Canada will still have 4 million doses by March 31st. The Prime Minister also announced help to battle homelessness during this pandemic, making good on a $1 billion commitment for rapid housing that he made last September. Toronto will be getting $330 million of that.
The city will be starting 7 projects to create more than 500 new affordable homes. These will be prioritized for people experiencing homelessness. Of the total number of new homes, 20% will also be prioritized for Indigenous communities and 20% for women and girls.
For the second straight day, northern Manitoba is leading the province in new cases of COVID-19. Health officials say First Nations people now make up 70% of all the active cases in the province. For more, we're joined by Dr. Michael Isaac, the Chief Medical Officer of Health for the northern region in Manitoba. Dr. Isaac, can you tell us what's behind the dramatic increase in the number of COVID-19 cases that you're seeing in northern Manitoba?
Hi, and thanks for having me on today. We have been seeing an increasing trend in some of the numbers in northern Manitoba. We're seeing cases in many different communities in the north. Some of those cases are related to holiday gatherings, gatherings at Christmas and New Year's. Also, some of those cases are related to individuals traveling out of community, visiting with family and friends at a community, and then coming back to community and bringing it back that way. So those are a couple of ways that COVID seems to be spreading. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is really the long-standing inequities that many northerners experience, especially around housing and overcrowded housing. We know that, crowded living conditions, indoor conditions with poor ventilation allows for the virus to spread a lot easier. And so certainly we are seeing that in many communities in northern Manitoba as well.
First Nations in Manitoba have been particularly hard hit by the second wave of COVID-19. Now 70% of all active cases in the province are in the north. What's being done to help curb the spread of these increasing numbers?
Yeah, so anytime we have an outbreak in a community, we implement some really, strong public health measures in that community. And so some of the key parts of our response relate to testing. making sure that we have good testing capacity and that we can test quickly. So many communities now have point of care testing where we can get results right away. And if they don't, we can send in a rapid response team to help with the testing. It's important, and part of our our public health management is doing a case investigation and contact tracing. So we ask the case a lot of questions where they may have been in contact with, and then have those individuals isolate, which gets to kind of the third key kind of pillar, of our public health response, which is really trying to allow people to isolate. So if they can't isolate in their home, then we have spots for people to isolate either in community or out of community. Communication's a big factor as well in terms of how we respond. So we've really been trying to work with local leadership to get messaging out and go on radio or TV or whatever the case may be to talk about COVID, talk about the cases in community, and really try and get the word out for people to stay home and stick to some of those fundamentals of COVID prevention.
Well, I was going to say, and what message would you have for Northerners right now to flatten the curve? Like, what are you telling individuals you want them to do?
Right now it's important that if you are offered isolation by the public health team and you can't isolate at home, please consider going to an isolation center. We know some people are hesitant to do that, but that's one way that we can really stop the transmission of COVID, is to have people not go back home especially to an overcrowded house. So that's one key thing that people can do. And then aside from that, we all know about the fundamentals, washing hands, coughing into your sleeve. If you're sick, stay home. Get tested for COVID if you have symptoms, even very mild symptoms. Some people will present with only a loss of taste or smell, sometimes just a runny nose. So if you have even mild symptoms, get tested for COVID and stay home, and keep your distance. So if you're in public, whether you're shopping or whatever the case may be, please try and keep that 6 feet distance from other people, which will really help to reduce the risk, and wear a mask. Wearing a non-medical mask in public, highly recommended at this point in time. And if we all do those things, it will help to cut the transmission of COVID in the north.
And stop the gatherings. Well, thank you, Dr. Isaac, for joining us and sharing that with us. Hopefully we see those numbers flatten out soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're going to need to take a break, but when we come back, a wrap-up of week 1 of the retrial of a trucker accused of manslaughter in Cindy Gladew's death. Stay with us. Welcome back. Week 1 of the Bradley Barton manslaughter trial in the death of Cindy Gladue finished today in Edmonton. APTN's Chris Stewart is following the story. A warning, some viewers may find the details of this testimony very disturbing. Chris, what were the developments this week?
The opening week of Bradley Barton's manslaughter trial began with the Crown asserting that Cindy Gladue did not consent to the act that allegedly killed her. Dr. Graham Dowling, who performed Cindy's autopsy, testified that Gladue's 11-centimeter tear in her vaginal wall was caused from considerable force. He admitted the tear could have been caused from a hand or fist inserted in her vagina. He testified that in his 6,000 autopsies, he has never seen this kind of injury. He said Gladue had cuts and scrapes all over her body, and he said there was no evidence that she was choked or held down. A small memorial for Cindy Gladue was held outside the Edmonton courts earlier this week. Family and friends gathered and honored her memory. Dr. Aaron Bader also testified that Cindy Gladue had a significant blood vessel broken, causing bleeding past her ovaries, and that the wound was caused by more than a typical amount of force. She said the tear was not similar to childbirth. Today, Kevin Atkins, one of Barton's co-workers, testified that he was drinking at the hotel bar with Barton and Cindy Gladue. He said that Barton asked him if he wanted a piece of her. He declined. Barton replied with, "Remember, what happens on the road stays on the road." The trial continues and is scheduled to last another 6 weeks. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Homeland Security and police across the United States are preparing for the worst in the days leading up to Joe Biden's inauguration next week. This is on the heels, of course, of the U.S. Capitol being stormed and seized by rioters last week. Black Lives Matter organizer Sandy Hudson and host of the Sandy and Nora Talks Politics podcast joins us now to talk about how the current unrest is expected to affect next week and how mostly white rioters were treated compared to Black and Indigenous peaceful protesters. Sandy, so reports out of the U.S. say that police and Homeland Security are actually planning for violent displays ahead of Joe Biden's inauguration next week. You know, knowing how Black Lives Matter protesters were handled and how police react to people of color in large gatherings compared to what we saw last week, I mean, what do you expect, is in store for us as an observer who will, of course, be watching how this all shakes down?
I mean, I'm really hesitant to make any sort of predictions, but I will say that I'm nervous. I am. My anxiety levels are way high. The type of violence that we saw on January 6th, for so many of us in, Black communities, in Indigenous communities, we know that type of violence seldom happens just once and goes away. And so whether that continues next week or in some other form, some other way, at some other time, I'm nervous. And so, I'm hesitant to make any sort of predictions, but I will tell you that I'm scared.
You know, I think it has to have been, as you were watching the, what largely people were saying was a failed police response to what happened at the Capitol building last week, and then you overlay that with what you've seen happen when Black or Indigenous people gather to protest something. What was going through your mind as you were watching that unfold?
You know what? I actually think that it is a misnomer to say that this was a failure in policing. I think that it was a choice. It was a choice that the police made to allow this violent white supremacist mob to do what they did. And it's a choice that they don't make when Black people are peacefully protesting or just living our lives inside our homes, just as much as it's a choice that the police, the RCMP, didn't make, recently in Mi'kma'ki and Subinegati First Nation, that type of choice that the police make to treat us as always suspicious, as always violent, as always criminal is a choice. And it's one that our policymakers and decision makers, politicians, have refused to reckon with.
That's an interesting perspective that you choose to. I didn't fail at my job. I chose to do my job differently. That's a really interesting way to look at it. And certainly, I mean, we've had the conversation here too. This isn't just an American thing. We've seen it, as you pointed out, here in Subinegati as well with the Mi'kmaq fishers. So I guess, do you feel like, I mean, how would you think that it would have been different if it was a large gathering that stormed the Capitol building last week, if they were not predominantly white, if it was Black or Indigenous, Hispanic protesters that stormed that building? Did you expect the police response would have been different?
I mean, I think we already know. I mean, there were protests in D.C. During the summer that had to do with the uprising against police brutality against Black people, where people didn't even get close to the Capitol. Not that they weren't even trying, like we were just having peaceful protest, and that was responded to with the National Guard being deployed on us. So, that's beyond the police, the city police, the Capitol Police, and the National Guard, all being deployed to target, harass, bully Black protesters who are simply trying to say peacefully, let us live, and being met with tear gas, rubber bullets, and all of these weapons, this violence from the police. And so I truly do believe that if a Black Lives Matter protest were to try to even get anywhere near the capital, it would have been a slaughter. And again, that's not something that we want. And, you know, we shouldn't try to like draw a direct comparison between these groups. A white supremacist violent mob is very different than what Black Lives Matter is. But, you know, we should be very clear that the police have already slaughtered and murdered quite a few of us simply for saying we should be able to live with dignity.
Well, I thank you for taking the time out of your day to chat with us about this. Certainly we will all be watching in the days ahead, watching this all unfold. Hopefully we've seen the last of it. You stay safe where you are in LA.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
Time for another break, but I've got more for you still ahead, so stay with us. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. A sky full of color and beauty. This amazing sunrise picture was sent in by Dale Kirkness. Dale took that shot in Gillam, that's up in northern Manitoba. You got a great shot? Send it to us. Email it to share@aptn.ca. Don't forget to say where it was taken, and be sure to watch and see if your photo is our next photo of the day. Let's now take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. To the east coast, we've got 2 and some snow for St. John's, mix of sun and cloud, and 1 degree in Charlottetown. Inukjuak, -26, sunny skies. Happy Valley of Goose Bay, sunshine, -5. Gaspé, -3 and sunny, 0 and snow for Montreal. Peterborough, mix of sun and cloud, and 2 degrees. Sault Ste. Marie, some snow and -5. Kapuskasing and Timmins, both -4 and snow, -9 in Big Trout Lake. -25 and snow for Churchill, -2 and some snow in the Paw. Sunshine for Winnipeg, -6, -2 over in Brandon. Yorkton, -2 with some snow expected, -1 for Regina, Saskatoon, North Battleford, and sunny. -16 and snow for Stony Rapids, 0 and snow for LaRange. Fort Chip, -3 and snow, 1 and sunshine for Grand Prairie. 5 and sunny for Lethbridge, 3 and sunny for Edmonton. Mix of sun and cloud and 2 degrees for Kamloops and Penticton, 1 and some snow expected for Quesnel. -1 and snow for Dease Lake, 2 and some snow expected for Prince George. -19 and cloudy skies for Old Crow, -13 and sunny for Dawson. -14 and sunshine for Fort Simpson. Wrigley, -15 and a mix of sun and cloud. Polytech, -21 with a mix of sun and cloud. Inuvik, -20 and snow. Same with Fort McPherson there. -27 clear skies for Chesterfield. New York, -22, snow. Iqaluit, -20 and snow. Arctic Bay, -23 and some snow expected there too. Well, that is a wrap on your news for the work week. Thanks for joining us. I'm Melissa Ridge, and I'll see you back here for your news weekend tomorrow. Have a great night.